You know what you folks have been doing? Flooding my comments section for months, practically begging for hospital ghost stories like junkies looking for a fix. Well, I've been collecting them. The real bone chillers, the ones that make your skin feel 2 sizes too small. And today, I'm serving up what might be the most disturbing one of the lot. This comes from a nurse at what we'll call Memorial General Hospital. What she experienced during her night shift will make you think twice about those antiseptic corridors and the things that might be walking them besides the living. Let me take you to Memorial General, a sprawling medical monstrosity originally constructed back in the 40s. They've renovated it over the decades, sure. Slapped on new wings, installed fancy equipment, updated the facilities. But there's something about those original sections that never quite shed their wrongness. You know the feeling. Those endless corridors with fluorescent lights that don't just flicker, but seem to pulse like dying fireflies. The linoleum floors that squeak and whisper under your feet, echoing every footstep like they're mocking you. And those shadows that seem to move just at the corner of your eye, like they're playing a game of red light, green light with your sanity. Our storyteller, let's call her Sarah, though that's not her real name, and she'd probably appreciate me keeping it that way, was 6 months into her nursing residency. She'd picked Memorial General specifically for its surgical program, which was supposed to be top-notch. She'd heard whispers, of course. The staff talked. They always do. Little comments about the peculiarities of the night shift, usually accompanied by nervous laughter that died too quickly. But Sarah was a modern woman of science, not easily shaken. She didn't believe in ghosts or any supernatural mumbo-jumbo. Medicine was her religion, science her god. The only spirits she believed in came in bottles with proof numbers on the label. But what happened during her shift on November 12th? That would change everything she thought she knew about the world and the thin membrane that separates what we can explain from what we can't. Sarah had been assigned to the east wing of the 4th floor, where they kept the recovering surgical patients. The wing dated back to 1943, part of the hospital's first construction phase. Despite renovations, the layout remained the same. A long corridor stretching like a throat, patient rooms lining it like teeth, the nurse's station positioned in the middle like a uvula, and supply closets scattered throughout like hidden tonsils. The night had been quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Most patients were sleeping, medications had been distributed, and Sarah was updating charts at the nurse's station. The computer screen cast a sickly blue glow across her face in the dimness, making her look like something not quite alive herself. The clock on the wall ticked past 2:15 a.m., that hour when the barrier between our world and whatever lies beyond becomes as thin as onion skin paper. It was at precisely this moment when the call light for room 418 lit up on the panel like a warning beacon. Room 418 belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Winters, a 72-year-old woman recovering from hip replacement surgery. She'd been admitted 3 days prior and was scheduled for discharge within the week. Sarah had checked on her just an hour earlier, and the old woman had been sleeping as peacefully as a child. Sarah grabbed her stethoscope and headed down the corridor toward 418. The hallway stretched before her, silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the distant, rhythmic beeping of monitors that sounded too much like a countdown. As she approached Mrs. Winters' room, something immediately struck her as wrong. The door was ajar. Sarah distinctly remembered closing it during her last rounds. It was standard protocol for patients who preferred privacy during sleep, and Mrs. Winters had been adamant about keeping her door closed. A chill ran down Sarah's spine like a bead of ice water. She pushed the door open wider, the hinges sighing like an old man settling into a chair. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of monitoring equipment and faint moonlight filtering through partially drawn blinds. Mrs. Winters was sitting upright in her bed, her thin frame rigid with tension, her eyes fixed on the upper corner of the room near the ceiling with the intensity of someone watching an approaching predator. "Mrs. Winters?" Sarah called softly, not wanting to startle her. "You pressed your call button. Do you need something for pain?" Mrs. Winters didn't turn to look at Sarah. She remained perfectly still, her gaze unwavering from that empty corner. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling like a leaf in October. "She won't stop watching me," Mrs. Winters said, her voice cracking. Sarah felt the hair on her arms stand at attention, like tiny soldiers preparing for battle. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet several degrees in an instant, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes a home there. "Who's watching you, Mrs. Winters?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady and professional, though something inside her was screaming to run, to get the hell out of that room and never look back. Slowly, with a trembling hand that looked like a pale spider, Mrs. Winters pointed toward the empty corner where the wall met the ceiling. "The nurse," she whispered. "The nurse in the old uniform. She's been standing there for hours, just watching me." Sarah instinctively glanced up at the corner but saw nothing, just the junction of two walls and the ceiling, partially shadowed in the dim light. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry as sandpaper. This was likely just confusion from pain medication, she told herself. Or perhaps early signs of hospital delirium, not uncommon in elderly patients after surgery. There were perfectly rational explanations that didn't involve things that shouldn't exist. "There's no one there, Mrs. Winters," Sarah said gently, approaching the bed. "You're safe. It's just you and me in the room." "No," Mrs. Winters insisted, her voice suddenly stronger, like steel wrapped in velvet. "She's been there since midnight. She doesn't move. She doesn't speak. She just watches. With those eyes. Dear God, those eyes." Trying to maintain her professional composure, though it was slipping like sand through her fingers, Sarah checked Mrs. Winters' vitals. Blood pressure, pulse, temperature, oxygen saturation. Everything was within normal parameters, which somehow made the situation more unsettling, not less. She reviewed the medication chart hanging at the foot of the bed. The last dose of pain medication had been administered 4 hours earlier, well past the point where hallucinations would typically occur. "Your vitals look good," Sarah said reassuringly, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "Would you like me to give you something to help you sleep?" Mrs. Winters finally tore her gaze away from the corner to look at Sarah, her eyes wide with fear, the kind of primal fear our ancestors must have felt when they heard rustling in the dark beyond their cave entrances. "You don't believe me," she said flatly. "But she's there. I can feel her watching. Her eyes, they're so empty, like holes in the world." Sarah adjusted Mrs. Winters' blankets and administered a mild sedative as prescribed in her chart for sleep difficulties. She stayed until Mrs. Winters' eyelids began to grow heavy, all the while feeling an inexplicable unease, as if someone else was indeed in the room with them, observing their every move with the patience of something that has all the time in the world. "Try to get some rest," Sarah said softly as Mrs. Winters finally drifted off. "I'll check on you again soon." As Sarah turned to leave, she couldn't help but glance once more at that corner. For a split second, so brief she would later question if she had imagined it, she thought she saw a slight distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement on a hot summer day. But it was gone before she could focus on it, like trying to catch smoke in your hands. Sarah exited the room, carefully closing the door behind her. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed the bathroom door across the hall was slightly open, the light inside creating a narrow strip of illumination on the corridor floor like a golden knife. She didn't remember the light being on earlier, but in a busy hospital, such minor details often went unnoticed. Or at least, that's what she told herself. As she passed the bathroom, something caught her eye. Her own reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't just her reflection that made her freeze mid-step, her heart suddenly hammering like it wanted to escape her chest. For just a split second, a heartbeat of time, she saw someone standing behind her in the mirror. A woman in what appeared to be an old-fashioned nursing uniform, complete with the distinctive cap that hadn't been part of the standard uniform for decades. The woman's face was obscured by shadows, but Sarah could feel her gaze, intense and penetrating, like icy needles in her skin. Sarah spun around so quickly she nearly lost her balance, her heart now a jackhammer against her ribs. The hallway behind her was completely empty. No one was there. No sound of retreating footsteps, no movement, nothing to indicate anyone had been standing just inches behind her moments before. Just the empty corridor stretching in both directions like the throat of some great beast. Her hands trembling slightly, Sarah hurried back to the nurse's station, trying to rationalize what she had just experienced. It was late, she was tired, the lighting in the hallway was poor. All logical explanations for what must have been a trick of light and shadow. The mind plays tricks, especially at 2 a.m. in a place where people regularly die. Her colleague Mark was at the station, reviewing patient files for the morning shift change. He looked up as Sarah approached, immediately noticing her pallor, the way her skin seemed stretched too tight across her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half joking. When Sarah didn't smile, his expression turned to concern. "What happened?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to sound unprofessional or, worse, unstable. But something in Mark's concerned expression made her decide to share her experience. Maybe he'd laugh it off, tell her she was working too hard, offer some rational explanation that would make the world right again. "It's probably nothing," she began, the words tumbling out like frightened children. But Mrs. Winters in 418 was acting strange. She kept insisting there was a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform standing in the corner of her room, watching her. Mark's face visibly paled, the clipboard in his hands lowering slowly to the desk like a descending elevator. "And?" he prompted, his voice suddenly tense, a guitar string wound too tight. "And as I was leaving, I thought I saw something in the bathroom mirror. A reflection of someone behind me. A woman in an old nurse's uniform. But when I turned around, no one was there." Mark set down his clipboard entirely now, running a hand through his hair. "Room 418, he said quietly, almost to himself, the words falling from his lips like stones. Then looking directly at Sarah. "You're not the first, you know. Several patients in that room have reported seeing what they describe as a watching nurse over the years. Always in the same corner. Always just watching." Sarah felt a chill run through her entire body, as if her blood had been replaced with ice water. "What are you saying?" "Most of us who've been here a while know about it," Mark continued, his voice low, as if afraid of being overheard by something other than human ears. "Administration dismisses it as patient confusion or medication side effects. But there are too many consistent reports from too many different patients and staff to dismiss it entirely." "Has anyone ever investigated it?" Sarah asked, her scientific mind still searching for rational explanations, even as another part of her, an older, more primitive part, knew there would be none. "Not officially," Mark replied. "But there are rumors, stories passed down among the night staff. They say that in the early 50s, a nurse who worked this floor was found dead in that very room." And as Mark spoke, Sarah knew with a certainty that transcended logic, that she would never see the world the same way again. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some things, once seen, can never be unseen, even if they weren't there to begin with. Before ending her shift, Sarah felt compelled to check on Mrs. Winters one last time. The events of the night had left her shaken, but her sense of duty as a nurse remained paramount. She wanted to ensure Mrs. Winters was comfortable before the day shift took over completely. As Sarah approached room 418, she noticed something odd. The door was wide open, and the room appeared to be empty. The bed was neatly made, with no sign that anyone had occupied it recently. The monitoring equipment had been turned off and pushed against the wall. Confused, Sarah checked the room number again. Yes, this was definitely 418, the same room where she had tended to Mrs. Winters just hours earlier. She stepped inside, looking around in bewilderment. The patient's personal belongings, the reading glasses, the paperback novel, the family photo, all were gone. Sarah hurried back to the nurse's station, where the day shift nurse, Jessica, was organizing medication charts. "Jessica, what happened to Mrs. Winters in 418? Sarah asked, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. "Was she transferred to another room?" Jessica looked up from her work, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Mrs. Winters? In 418? She shook her head slowly. "We don't have a Mrs. Winters in 418. That room has been empty for renovation all week. The flooring is being replaced." Sarah felt as if the floor beneath her own feet had suddenly disappeared. "That's impossible," she insisted. "I was just in there a few hours ago. Mrs. Winters, 72 years old, post-hip replacement." She pressed her call button at 2:15 a.m. "I administered a sedative to help her sleep." Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She pulled up the patient registry on the computer and scrolled through it methodically. "Sarah, there's no Eleanor Winters in our system at all. Not in room 418, not anywhere in the hospital." Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had she imagined the entire encounter? No, it had been too vivid, too detailed. She remembered checking Mrs. Winters' vitals, reviewing her chart, administering the sedative. "Let me see the medication log," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica pulled up the electronic medication record for the night shift. There was no entry for a sedative administered to room 418 at any point during the night. According to the official record, Sarah had never entered that room. "This isn't possible," Sarah muttered, more to herself than to Jessica. "I was there. She was there." Jessica placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "You've had a long night shift. Maybe you should get some rest." Sarah nodded numbly and gathered her things to leave. As she walked down the corridor toward the elevator, she couldn't resist one final glance back at room 418. The door was closed now, a small under-renovation sign hanging from the handle. But as she watched, the sign swayed slightly, as if disturbed by someone opening the door from inside. And for just a moment, so brief she would spend years wondering if she had imagined it, Sarah thought she saw two faces peering out at her through the narrow window in the door. An elderly woman with frightened eyes, and behind her, a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform, her face obscured by shadows. Sarah spent the remainder of her shift unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed deeper, every unexplained sound more significant. When morning finally came, bringing with it the bustling activity of day shift and the comforting brightness of sunlight streaming through the windows, Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. But her curiosity had been piqued. After handing off her patients to the day nurse, Sarah made her way to the hospital's basement, where the archives were kept. The archivist, An elderly man named Dr. Peterson, who had worked at Memorial General for over 40 years, seemed unsurprised by her request to research incidents from the 1950s. "Room 418, you say?" he mused, leading her through rows of filing cabinets. "Interesting that you should ask about that particular room." After some searching, Dr. Peterson produced a thin file labeled Incident Report, E. Crane, 1952. Inside was a yellowed report detailing the death of Elizabeth Crane, a 28-year-old nurse who had worked the night shift on the 4th floor. According to the report, Nurse Crane had been found dead in room 418 on the morning of March 17, 1952. The cause of death was determined to be an overdose of morphine, which she had apparently stolen from the medication storage. The report noted that rigor mortis indicated she had been dead for approximately 12 hours before being discovered by the day shift nurse. What chilled Sarah to the bone was the final detail in the report. Deceased was found standing in northeast corner of room, facing patient bed. Position suggests death occurred while on duty, possibly while checking on patient. The implication was clear and horrifying. Elizabeth Crane had died while standing in that corner, watching her patient, and had remained there, deceased, throughout the entire night shift. No one had noticed. No one had checked on her. She had simply stood there, dead, watching, for 12 hours. Sarah closed the file with trembling hands. "Has anyone else researched this?" she asked Dr. Peterson. "Every few years, someone comes down here asking about Elizabeth Crane," he replied. "Usually after an incident in room 418. The following week, Sarah requested a transfer to the west wing of the hospital. Her supervisor approved it without question, almost as if such requests were routine. To this day, Sarah refuses to enter room 418 alone, and she always makes a point of checking the corners of patient rooms during her rounds. Some say that Elizabeth Crane continues her eternal night shift, watching over patients from that corner in room 418. Others suggest her spirit remains trapped there, forever reliving her final moments. But all agree on one thing. If you're ever a patient at Memorial General and find yourself assigned to room 418, request a different room. And if you can't, whatever you do, don't look up at the corner during the night shift. Because once you see her, she'll never stop watching you. If you've experienced something similar or have your own hospital ghost story, share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more true, scary stories. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Until then, sleep well, if you can.